The auction block was the last place Nora Adams expected to find herself. A coarse burlap sack pulled over her head as rough hands pushed her forward. The jeers of the crowd cut through the suffocating fabric, their voices blending with the dusty heat of 1876 Montana territory. She fought against the rope binding her wrists, determined not to show fear despite the hammering of her heart against her ribs. "Next up, gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed across the makeshift platform. "A fine woman from back east, educated, they say, and plenty spirited. Perfect for any man wanting a wife who can read to him on cold nights." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Nora clenched her jaw. 2 weeks ago, she had been teaching in a schoolhouse in Philadelphia. Now she was being sold to the highest bidder, accused of a crime she didn't commit with nothing but the tattered dress on her back. "Do I hear $50?" the auctioneer called. "25," someone shouted. "Can't even see her face," another voice complained. "That's the point of the sale, boys," the auctioneer laughed. "Mystery merchandise, but I'm told she's a pretty thing. $30, do I hear 30? 30, came a gruff voice. 40, shouted another. The bidding continued, the amounts climbing slowly as men gambled on what might be beneath the sack. Nora trembled, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. She'd heard stories of these frontier bride auctions, women shipped west to marry strangers, but this was different. This was punishment, orchestrated by the wealthy banker whose advances she had rejected, whose lies had seen her convicted of theft and sentenced to this humiliation. $100. The new voice cut through the chatter, deep, steady, authoritative. The crowd fell silent. "Well now," the auctioneer drawled, surprised by the generous sum. "We have 100 from Mr. Tucker Jones. Any other takers, gentlemen?" Silence hung in the air. $100 was more than most men earned in 2 months. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Jones. Nora felt herself being pulled forward, then down the steps of the platform. Strong hands steadied her, different from the rough grip that had forced her onto the auction block. She heard the clink of coins being counted, then felt herself being led away from the crowd. Only when they were some distance away did the hands release her. Nora stood perfectly still, uncertain what awaited her now. "Madam," her buyer's voice said quietly, "I'm going to remove this sack now." Before she could respond, she felt the rough fabric being lifted. Squinting against the sudden sunlight, Nora found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath a well-worn cowboy hat. His expression was unreadable as he studied her face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, to her astonishment, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small knife. With careful movements, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. "My name is Tucker Jones," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "And I'll marry you today if you'll have me. Not because I bought you, but because no woman should be sold like cattle, and marriage is the only way I know to protect you properly in these parts." Nora rubbed her chafed wrists, her mind racing. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." His eyes softened slightly. "I know enough. I know injustice when I see it." He glanced over his shoulder at the crowd still gathered around the auction block. "We don't have much time. The sheriff's looking the other way today, but that won't last. I have a homestead north of here. It's not much, but you'd be safe. The choice is yours, Miss Adams," she said. "Nora Adams." Tucker nodded. "Miss Adams. What will it be?" Nora looked back at the town, at the men who had bid on her like she was nothing more than merchandise. Then she looked at Tucker Jones, a stranger who had just spent a small fortune to offer her a choice. "I'll marry you today, Mr. Jones," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'll thank you for it. But don't expect a proper wife. This is an arrangement of necessity, nothing more." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't presume otherwise, Miss Adams." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. As they walked toward the small church at the edge of town, Nora couldn't help wondering what kind of man would spend $100 to marry a woman he'd never seen, only to treat her with more respect than any man she'd known before. The wedding, if it could be called that, was brief and lacking in ceremony. The white-haired preacher raised his eyebrows at Nora's disheveled appearance, but asked no questions when Tucker pressed an extra $5 into his palm. Two strangers from the street served as witnesses, lured by the promise of a free drink afterward. "Do you, Tucker James Jones, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked, his voice flat and mechanical. "I do," Tucker said simply. "And do you, Nora Elizabeth Adams, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Nora hesitated, the weight of what she was doing suddenly overwhelming. She looked at Tucker, who stood straight and solemn beside her. His eyes met hers, and something in them, a silent promise, gave her the courage to answer. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Tucker leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on her cheek, his lips barely grazing her skin. Then he stepped back, signed the marriage certificate, and handed her a plain gold band. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "You don't have to wear it if you don't want to." Nora slipped it onto her finger, finding it fit remarkably well. "Thank you." Outside the church, a wagon waited. Tucker helped her climb onto the wooden seat, then untied his horse from the back and mounted it. "It's about 4 hours to the homestead," he said. "The road can be rough." "Will you be all right?" Nora nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Mr. Jones, Tucker," he corrected. "I reckon you should call me Tucker now." "Tucker," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done today." He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the setting sun. "No need for thanks. I did what any decent man would do." But as they left the town behind, Nora knew that wasn't true. Decent men had stood in that crowd, bidding on her like she was livestock. This man, her husband now, strange as that seemed, had done something extraordinary. The journey to Tucker's homestead was largely silent. Nora was exhausted, her body aching from weeks of poor treatment. Several times she nearly dozed off, jerking awake when the wagon hit a particularly deep rut in the road. Tucker rode alongside, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of upcoming rough patches, but otherwise leaving her to her thoughts. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape, Nora finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why were you at that auction today?" Tucker was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was in town for supplies, heard about the auction from the shopkeeper." He paused. "Said they were selling an Eastern woman accused of theft. Didn't sit right with me." "You didn't believe I was guilty," he glanced over at her. "Doesn't matter if you were or weren't. No person should be sold like that." Nora studied his profile, strong and weathered by sun and wind. "I wasn't, guilty, I mean. I was a school teacher in Philadelphia. A powerful man wanted me for his mistress. When I refused him, he accused me of stealing a valuable brooch." Tucker nodded slowly. "Figured it was something like that. You did. The way you held yourself on that platform, proud even with a sack over your head, that's not the posture of a thief." The simple observation touched Nora unexpectedly. After weeks of having her character questioned and maligned, to be seen, truly seen by this stranger was overwhelming. "Look there," Tucker said, pointing ahead. "That's the homestead." In the fading light, Nora could make out a modest cabin nestled at the base of a gentle slope. A small barn stood nearby, and a corral held several horses. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, which struck her as odd. "Do you have family?" she asked, suddenly wondering if she was being brought home to a household of Joan's men. Tucker shook his head. "Just me. And Mrs. Whitley from the neighboring farm. She comes by once a week to help with washing and such. Must have lit the stove before she left today." As they drew closer, Nora could see that the cabin, while simple, was well maintained. A small garden plot to one side showed neat rows of vegetables, and wildflowers grew near the front door. It was a far cry from her family's townhouse in Philadelphia, but there was a peacefulness to it that called to her weary soul. Tucker helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. For a moment they stood close, and Nora was suddenly aware of how tall he was, how his presence seemed to envelop her without being threatening. "I'll show you inside," he said, stepping back. "You must be hungry." The interior of the cabin was clean and orderly, if sparse. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, 2 chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the hearth. 2 doors led off the main room. "That's my room," Tucker said, pointing to one door. "And that'll be yours." He indicated the second door. "It's not much, but it's private." Nora blinked in surprise. "My own room." Tucker hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Like I said at the church, this is an arrangement of necessity. I made a promise to protect you, not to." He cleared his throat. "Well, you know." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by a strange disappointment she didn't want to examine too closely. "Thank you," she said. "That's very considerate." Tucker moved to the stove where a pot of something bubbled. Mrs. Whitley left stew. "Are you hungry?" As if in answer, Nora's stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since the previous night, a meager portion of hard bread and weak soup. Tucker's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I'll take that as a yes." They ate in relative silence, Tucker serving her a generous bowl of savory stew and thick slices of fresh bread. Nora tried to maintain some semblance of the table manners she'd been raised with, but hunger won out, and she devoured the meal with unseemly haste. "There's more," Tucker said when she'd scraped her bowl clean, "and you're welcome to it." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." As she ate her second helping, more slowly this time, she studied her new husband across the table. In the warm light of the oil lamps, she could see him more clearly than before. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, not much older than her 23 years. His features were strong and regular, his hands large and calloused from work. He ate efficiently, without hurry but without lingering, like a man accustomed to seeing food as fuel rather than pleasure. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, breaking the silence. 7 years, he replied. "Built the cabin myself, started with just the land and a tent. And before that..." He finished his stew before answering. "Texas, mostly. Ran cattle for a while, fought in the war." Nora placed her spoon in her empty bowl. "The war? You mean the Civil War?" Tucker nodded. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63 when I was 18. Mustered out in '65. That made him 31, older than she'd thought, but not by much. "And then you came here." "Not right away. Drifted for a few years. Then won this land in a poker game from a man who'd never seen it. Turned out to be a fair deal." Nora tried to reconcile the image of the young soldier with the composed man before her. "Do you have family elsewhere?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. Lost my folks to cholera when I was 16. Had a younger brother, but he didn't make it through the war." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. Tucker stood and began clearing the table. "It was a long time ago. What about you? Anyone who'll be looking for you?" Nora shook her head. My parents died in a fire 2 years ago. I have a cousin in Boston, but we've never been close. I doubt she even knows what happened to me." Tucker nodded, accepting this information without comment. He placed the dishes in a basin of water, then turned to her. "You must be tired. I'll show you to your room." The second bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. A handmade quilt in shades of blue and green covered the bed, and a small window overlooked the garden. "There's water in the pitcher," Tucker said. "Bathroom's out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed if you need it during the night. I'll bring your things in." "My things?" Nora asked, confused. "From the wagon, your trunk." Nora felt a surge of hope. "I don't have a trunk. They took everything when I was arrested." Tucker frowned. "That's not right. Wait here." He returned a few minutes later with a small wooden crate. "It's not much, just some things Mrs. Whitley left. Nightgown, a dress, some women's items." He looked slightly uncomfortable. "She has a daughter about your size who moved to Denver last year. Left some things behind." Nora took the crate, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," Tucker nodded. "I'll leave you to rest. We can talk more in the morning." He hesitated at the door. "Good night, Mrs. Jones." The name startled her. "Good night, Tucker." After he left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Hours ago, she had been a prisoner facing a life of servitude or worse. Now, she was Mrs. Tucker Jones, mistress of a modest homestead with a husband who treated her with unexpected respect. She changed into the simple cotton nightgown, washed her face and hands in the cool water from the pitcher, and slipped beneath the quilt. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The bed was comfortable enough, but unfamiliar sounds kept her alert. The creak of the cabin settling, the distant howl of what might have been a coyote, and the occasional footsteps of Tucker moving about in the main room. Eventually, she heard him enter his own room and close the door. Only then did she allow herself to relax, her body surrendering to exhaustion while her mind continued to wonder what tomorrow would bring in this strange new life. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the small window. For a moment, Nora was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings triggering a flash of panic before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was no longer in Philadelphia, no longer in prison, no longer on the auction block. She was in Montana territory, in the home of a man she had married less than a day after meeting him. She rose and dressed in the simple calico dress Mrs. Whitley had left. It was a bit loose in the bodice and short at the ankles, but it was clean and whole, unlike the tattered garment she'd been wearing for weeks. She found a hairbrush among the items and worked it through her tangled honey-brown hair until it fell in smooth waves past her shoulders. When she emerged from her room, the main area was empty, but a pot of coffee warmed on the stove, and a plate covered with a cloth sat on the table. A note beside it read simply, "Gone to check the north pasture. Back mid-morning." Beneath the cloth, she found biscuits, still warm, and a jar of what appeared to be apple preserves. Her stomach growled, reminding her that despite the hearty stew the night before, her body was still making up for weeks of inadequate nourishment. After eating, Nora explored the cabin more thoroughly. Everything was neat and functional, with few decorative touches. A bookshelf in the corner held a small but eclectic collection of practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry, a Bible, several volumes of poetry, and well-worn copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey. The last surprised her. She wouldn't have taken Tucker for a reader of classical literature. On the mantel above the fireplace stood a single photograph in a wooden frame, a family portrait showing a stern-faced man, a gentle-looking woman, and two boys. The younger was perhaps 12, with a mischievous smile, while the older, unmistakably, a young Tucker stood solemn and straight-backed. This must be the family he had lost. Feeling suddenly like an intruder, Nora turned away from the photograph. She found a broom in a corner and began sweeping the already clean floor, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. She had just finished this task when the door opened and Tucker entered, bringing with him the scent of sun-warmed earth and horses. He stopped short when he saw her, as if surprised to find her there, though where else she might have gone, Nora couldn't imagine. "Good morning," she said, setting the broom aside. "Morning," he replied, removing his hat. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you, and thank you for breakfast." He nodded, hanging his hat on its peg. "Not much of a cook, but I can manage biscuits. Mrs. Whitley makes the preserves." An awkward silence fell between them. Nora clasped her hands in front of her, unsure what was expected of her as a wife in name only. "I thought perhaps we should talk," she said finally. "About arrangements, what you expect of me." Tucker gestured to the table. "Might as well sit." They took the same seats they had occupied the night before. Tucker poured himself a cup of coffee, then refilled Nora's cup without asking. "I don't expect anything you're not willing to give," he said after taking a sip. "You're free to come and go as you please. But I'd advise against going to town alone for a while. The men who were at that auction might not understand our arrangement." "And what is our arrangement exactly?" Nora asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "I'm grateful for what you did, truly, but I don't understand why you did it." Tucker was silent for a long moment, his eyes on his coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "My mother was sold, much like you were, not on an auction block but traded by her father to settle a debt. She was 16. My father was 40. She had no say in the matter." Nora's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "My father wasn't a cruel man, but he wasn't kind either. My mother deserved better." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "When I saw you on that platform, I couldn't walk away, but I don't want you to feel like you've traded one form of bondage for another. The marriage was necessary for your protection, but beyond that, you owe me nothing." The honesty in his words moved her. "I want to earn my keep," she said. "I'm not afraid of hard work." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I noticed the floor was already clean." Nora felt a flush of embarrassment. "Force of habit. I lived with a family in Philadelphia while I taught at their children's school. I helped with chores." "You're a teacher," she nodded. "I was, for 3 years. Tucker considered this. "We have a small school in town. Only open during winter months when the children aren't needed for planting and harvest. They're always short on teachers." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "Do you think they would hire me?" "Might," Tucker said. "Though given how you came to be here, there could be talk." The hope dimmed. "Yes, I suppose so. Give it time," Tucker advised. "Let people get to know you first. Meanwhile, there's plenty to do here if you're looking for work. Garden needs tending. Chickens to feed. I've been meaning to put up preserves for winter but haven't gotten around to it." "I can do all that," Nora said eagerly. "And cooking, though I'll need some guidance on using that stove. It's different from what I'm used to." Tucker nodded. "Mrs. Whitley comes tomorrow. She can show you the ropes." He drained his coffee cup and stood. "I need to mend a fence in the west pasture. Probably be gone most of the day." "I'll have dinner ready when you return," Nora promised. After Tucker left, Nora set about familiarizing herself with her new home. She found the chicken coop behind the house, where a dozen hens and a strutting rooster provided eggs and occasional meat. The garden was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with rows of potatoes, beans, carrots, and other vegetables in various stages of growth. A small orchard of apple trees stood beyond, and berry bushes lined one side of the property. Inside, she took inventory of the pantry and root cellar. Tucker kept a well-stocked larder, sacks of flour and sugar, jars of preserves and pickles, smoked meats and dried fruits. There was even a small container of real tea, a luxury she hadn't expected to find in this frontier home. By mid-afternoon, Nora had cleaned the cabin thoroughly, prepared a stew for dinner, and started bread dough rising. She had just taken a break to rest on the small porch when she saw a cloud of dust approaching along the road. As it drew closer, she made out a wagon driven by a woman in a bonnet. Nora stood, smoothing her borrowed dress nervously. The wagon pulled up in front of the cabin, and a plump, pleasant-faced woman of about 50 climbed down with surprising agility. "Well now," the woman said, looking Nora up and down with frank curiosity. "You must be the bride. I'm Harriet Whitley, neighbor from 2 miles east." Nora stepped forward, extending her hand. "Nora Jones, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitley." Mrs. Whitley ignored the hand and instead pulled Nora into a warm embrace. "None of that formality, dear. It's Harriet to friends, and we're going to be friends, I can tell." She stepped back, her keen eyes assessing. "My Emma's dress fits you well enough, though we'll need to let down that hem. Where's that husband of yours?" "Mending a fence in the west pasture," Nora said, still recovering from the unexpected hug. Harriet nodded approvingly. "Good man, Tucker Jones. Works harder than 3 ordinary men. Not much for conversation, but solid as they come." She peered at Nora more closely. "He said he met you in town yesterday. That was mighty quick courting." Nora hesitated, unsure how much Tucker had shared about their unusual meeting. "Oh, don't you worry about explaining," Harriet continued, waving a hand dismissively. "Tucker told me the whole story when he rode over last night to ask about Emma's clothes. Said he married you straight off that auction block." Her expression softened. "Brave thing you did, going with a stranger. But you chose well, even if it wasn't much of a choice." Relief washed over Nora. "He's been very kind," Harriet chuckled. "Kind, yes, but probably about as talkative as a fence post, I'd wager." She gestured to her wagon. "I've brought some things for you." "Tucker said you came with nothing but the clothes on your back." The wagon contained several dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, and various personal items. "Emma won't miss these," Harriet explained as they carried the clothing inside. "She married a shopkeeper in Denver. Has fancy store-bought dresses now. These are good, serviceable clothes for ranch living." Nora was overwhelmed by the generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks. Women look out for each other out here. Has to be that way." Harriet looked around the cabin approvingly. "You've been busy, I see. Place hasn't looked this clean since." "Well, ever probably." They spent the next few hours together, with Harriet showing Nora the particulars of the cast-iron stove, explaining the best ways to preserve the garden's bounty, and sharing useful information about neighboring farms and the small town of Willow Creek, which lay about 12 miles to the south. "Not much to the place," Harriet said as they worked together to finish the bread Nora had started. "General store, smithy, saloon, stay clear of that, and a church that doubles as the schoolhouse come winter. Doctor visits once a month from Helena, unless there's an emergency." "Tucker mentioned the school might need a teacher," Nora said cautiously. "I taught in Philadelphia before coming west." Harriet's eyes lit up. "Did you now? That's a stroke of luck." Last winter they had old Mr. Farnsworth teaching, and half the children came home thinking the War of 1812 was fought in 1851. She shook her head in disgust. "Man's memory is going faster than his eyesight, and that's saying something." As the afternoon wore on, Nora found herself genuinely enjoying Harriet's company. The older woman was forthright and occasionally brusque, but underneath lay genuine kindness and a sharp intelligence that belied her limited formal education. "I'd best be getting back," Harriet said eventually, glancing at the lengthening shadows. "My Henry will be wondering if I've run off with a traveling salesman." She winked. "Not that any have come through lately worth running off with." Nora walked her to the wagon. "Thank you for everything, Harriet. Truly." Harriet patted her hand. "You're going to be just fine, Nora Jones, and if you need anything at all, you send word. I'm only 2 miles east, and my Henry makes the best whiskey this side of the Mississippi, medicinal purposes only, of course." She winked again. After Harriet left, Nora returned to the kitchen to finish preparing dinner. She was just taking the bread from the oven when Tucker returned, looking tired but satisfied. "Fence is mended," he announced, hanging up his hat. "Should hold through winter now." He sniffed the air appreciatively. "Something smells good." "Rabbit stew," Nora said. "I found one dressed in the cold room. I hope that was all right. More than all right, that's what it's there for." Tucker washed up at the basin while Nora set the table. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Tucker asked, "Did Mrs. Whitley come by? Thought I saw wagon tracks in the yard." "Yes, she brought clothes and was very helpful." Nora hesitated, then added, "She knows how we met." Tucker nodded. "Figured she would." "Not much stays secret around here," she seemed. "Accepting. Harriet judges people on who they are, not where they came from. Not everyone's like that, though." Nora absorbed this warning. "She told me about Willow Creek. It sounds very small." "It is," Tucker agreed, "but it's growing. Railroad might come through in a year or two. That would change things." "Would that be good?" Tucker considered the question seriously. "Good for business. Maybe not so good for the quiet. I came out here to get away from crowds." Nora wondered what had driven this man to seek solitude, what experiences during the war or after had made him retreat to this remote homestead. But she didn't ask. They were still strangers, despite the gold band on her finger. That night, as she prepared for bed, Nora found herself listening for Tucker's movements in the next room. The wall between their bedrooms was thin enough that she could hear the creak of his bed as he settled in for the night. It struck her as odd, being so physically close to a man she barely knew, yet bound to him by law and circumstances. In Philadelphia, she had received several proposals of marriage, most notably from the banker's son, whose rejection had indirectly led to her current situation. None of those suitors had stirred any particular emotion in her. Yet this quiet cowboy, with his unexpected kindness and respect, had awakened something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. Gratitude and curiosity. But as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself wondering what it would be like to truly be Tucker Jones's wife, in all the ways that mattered. The days fell into a rhythm as summer deepened into early autumn. Nora quickly adapted to the routines of ranch life, rising with the sun to prepare breakfast, tending the garden, preserving its bounty for the coming winter, and caring for the chickens that had become unexpected favorites. She had named each hen, much to Tucker's quiet amusement, and talked to them as she collected eggs each morning. Tucker worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, tending the small herd of cattle that grazed in the north pasture, breaking the young colt he was training, and preparing the ranch for the harsh Montana winter ahead. He often returned exhausted, but always took time to ask about Nora's day, to thank her for the meals she prepared, and occasionally to share news he'd heard from passing travelers or on his infrequent trips to town. They settled into a comfortable coexistence, like friendly strangers sharing a home. Tucker was unfailingly respectful of Nora's privacy, never entering her room without knocking, never making demands or presuming upon his rights as her husband. Sometimes, when she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, Nora wondered if he regretted his impulsive rescue, if he found her presence more burden than blessing. But then he would do something: bring her wildflowers he'd found while checking fence lines, or whittle a wooden spoon to replace one that had broken, or simply offer a rare smile when she mastered a new skill, and she would know that whatever this arrangement was, it wasn't a burden to him. 6 weeks after her arrival, Tucker announced at breakfast that he needed to go to town for supplies. "We're running low on flour and sugar," he said, sipping his coffee, "and I need to pick up some tools from the blacksmith. Thought you might want to come along." Nora looked up in surprise. "To town," Tucker nodded. "Figured it's time you saw Willow Creek properly, met some of the neighbors." He hesitated. "Unless you'd rather not." "No, I'd like to go," Nora said quickly. Apart from Harriet's weekly visits, she'd had no contact with anyone but Tucker since arriving at the ranch. "Do you think it will be all right?" Tucker understood her concern. Most folks in town didn't witness that auction, those who did have had time to hear different versions of the story. "Harriet's been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen." His lips quirked. "And even to some who won't." Nora laughed. Harriet's forthright manner and generous spirit had made her a cherished friend over the past weeks. "Then yes, I'd very much like to go to town." They set out after breakfast, taking the wagon with a list of supplies needed for the coming winter. The journey took just over 2 hours, with Tucker pointing out landmarks and neighboring homesteads along the way. Nora found herself enjoying the outing immensely, asking questions about the territory's history and the families who had settled there. "You know a great deal about everyone," she observed. Tucker shrugged. "People talk, I listen." "But rarely speak yourself," Nora teased gently. That earned her one of his rare smiles. "Not much worth saying that someone else hasn't already said better." As they crested a hill, the town of Willow Creek came into view. It was indeed small, one main street with a handful of buildings on either side, and a few homes scattered beyond. A creek, presumably the town's namesake, wound behind the buildings, lined with the willows that had inspired the settlement's name. "It's charming," Nora said, and meant it. After the crowded streets of Philadelphia, there was something appealing about the openness of this frontier town. Tucker guided the wagon to a hitching post in front of the general store. "We'll start here. Mr. Hollies carries most of what we need." As Tucker helped her down from the wagon, Nora was acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and smoothed down the dark blue dress that Harriet had altered to fit her perfectly. "Mrs. Jones," Tucker said formally, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Nora placed her hand on his arm, appreciating his public acknowledgement of their relationship. "Lead the way, Mr. Jones." The general store was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves stocked with everything from dried goods to tools to ready-made clothing. A bespectacled man with thinning gray hair stood behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw Tucker. "Jones. About time you showed your face in town. Was beginning to think you'd gone hermit on us completely." His gaze shifted to Nora, curiosity evident. "And who might this lovely lady be, Mr. Hollies?" "This is my wife, Nora," Tucker said, a note of pride in his voice that warmed Nora unexpectedly. "Nora, this is Edgar Hollies, proprietor of the finest and only general store in Willow Creek." Mr. Hollies' eyebrows shot up. "Wife? Well, I'll be." "Tucker Jones married. When did this happen?" 2 months ago, Tucker replied calmly. 2 months and you're just now bringing her to town." "For shame, Jones." Mr. Hollies came around the counter to take Nora's hand in both of his. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Jones. You must have the patience of a saint to put up with this solitary man." Nora smiled, warming to the shopkeeper's friendly manner. "The solitude has its charms, Mr. Hollies, but I am glad to finally see the town." "Well, you're a breath of fresh air, that's certain." Mr. Hollies turned to Tucker. "The usual supplies, I suppose." While Tucker discussed his list with the shopkeeper, Nora wandered the store, examining the goods on display. She was inspecting a shelf of books when a woman's voice spoke behind her. "You must be Tucker Jones's mysterious bride." Nora turned to find a stylishly dressed woman with elaborately coiffed dark hair and sharp, assessing eyes. Despite the heat of the day, she wore a fashionable dress of deep burgundy that would not have looked out of place in Philadelphia's finest drawing rooms. "I am Nora Jones," she confirmed, extending her hand. "And you are Victoria Blackwell," the woman replied, barely touching Nora's fingers before withdrawing her hand. "My husband owns the saloon and most of the buildings in town." There was something in her tone, a subtle emphasis on ownership that immediately put Nora on guard. "How nice to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell." Victoria's eyes swept over Nora's simple dress and practical boots. "I understand you and Mr. Jones had quite the whirlwind courtship." The implication was clear. Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "Sometimes one knows immediately when something is right." Victoria's painted lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. Though one wonders what brings an educated Eastern woman to a place like Willow Creek, especially one who ends up married to a man like Tucker Jones." "A man like Tucker Jones," Nora repeated, her tone cooling. "You mean a hard-working, honest, respected rancher?" Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Jones is respected well enough, keeps to himself, pays his debts, but he's hardly the sort of man one would expect to attract someone of refinement." Her gaze sharpened. "There are rumors, you know, about how you two met." Before Nora could respond, Tucker appeared at her side. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said with a curt nod, "I see you've met my wife." "Indeed I have," Victoria replied, her manner shifting subtly. "She's quite charming." "You're a fortunate man, Mr. Jones." "I'm well aware," Tucker said, placing a protective hand at the small of Nora's back. "If you'll excuse us, we have several more stops to make." As they walked away, Nora whispered, "She knows about the auction." "Victoria Blackwell knows everything that happens within 50 miles, Tucker replied grimly. "And what she doesn't know, she invents." They completed their shopping efficiently, with Tucker introducing Nora to the blacksmith, the postmaster, and several other townsfolk they encountered. Most were friendly and welcoming, though Nora could sense curiosity and, occasionally, judgment beneath the pleasantries. Their final stop was the small church at the edge of town, where Tucker hoped to speak with the preacher about the coming school term. As they approached the white clapboard building, a man emerged tall and gaunt, with a shock of white hair and a stern countenance. "Reverend Miller," Tucker called. "Got a moment?" The preacher turned, his expression softening slightly when he saw Tucker. "Mr. Jones, this is an unexpected pleasure." His gaze shifted to Nora and recognition flickered in his eyes. "And Mrs. Jones, I presume. We've met before, though under rather different circumstances." Nora realized with a start that this was the same preacher who had married them that day, a fact she'd forgotten in the blur of events. "Reverend," she acknowledged, suddenly self-conscious. "What brings you to town today?" the preacher asked, his tone neutral. "Supplies," Tucker said. "And to ask about the school." Nora was a teacher back east, thought she might be interested in taking on the position here this winter. Reverend Miller's bushy eyebrows rose. "Is that so? We are indeed in need of a teacher. Mr. Farnsworth has decided his rheumatism won't allow another winter of wrangling children." He studied Nora with new interest. "What subjects did you teach, Mrs. Jones?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and basic sciences," Nora replied. I taught children aged 6 to 12 in Philadelphia for 3 years. Impressive credentials, the preacher acknowledged. Though I must be frank, there has been talk about the unusual circumstances of your arrival in our community. Some parents might have concerns. Tucker stiffened beside her, but Nora placed a calming hand on his arm. I understand, Reverend. Perhaps you could suggest how I might address those concerns. The preacher considered this. Come to church on Sunday. Let people meet you properly. Then we can discuss the teaching position further. It was more than Nora had hoped for. Thank you, Reverend. We'll be here. As they drove home, the wagon loaded with supplies, Nora reflected on the day's encounters. It wasn't as bad as I feared, she admitted. Though Mrs. Blackwell was rather direct. Tucker snorted. That's one word for it. Victoria fancies herself the queen of Willow Creek, gets her nose out of joint when people don't bow and scrape appropriately. She seemed particularly interested in our relationship. Victoria's interested in anything that might make good gossip. Tucker glanced at her. Does it bother you what people might think? Nora considered the question carefully. It bothers me that they might judge you for helping me. As for myself, she shrugged. I've faced worse judgments recently. Tucker was quiet for a long moment. You did well today. Carried yourself with dignity. Coming from the usually taciturn Tucker, this was high praise indeed. Nora felt a warm glow of satisfaction that lasted all the way back to the ranch. That evening, as they ate dinner, Tucker seemed unusually contemplative. Finally, as Nora cleared the dishes, he said, "Been thinking about the sleeping arrangements." Nora nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Oh," Tucker's face reddened slightly. "Not like that. I meant, winter's coming, gets cold in that back bedroom, no fireplace." It was true. Nora's room, while comfortable enough during the warmer months, was already growing chilly at night as autumn deepened. "I was thinking," Tucker continued, clearly uncomfortable with the topic, "that I could move my things to the loft above the barn. That way you could have the main bedroom. It has the fireplace." Nora stared at him, touched by his consideration but dismayed by the suggestion. "You want to sleep in the barn? In winter? It's not so bad. Insulated it well last year. Been meaning to make it a proper bunkhouse for when I hire help during calving season." "That's ridiculous," Nora said firmly. "I won't have you sleeping in a barn while I take your bed. This is your home." "Our home," Tucker corrected quietly. The simple statement caught Nora off guard. Yes, legally she was his wife and this was her home now. But sometimes it still felt temporary, like an extended visit that might end at any moment. "Our home," she agreed. "But I still won't have you sleeping in the barn. We'll find another solution." Tucker looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "All right. We'll figure something out before the snow flies." Later, lying in her increasingly cold bedroom, Nora found herself thinking about Tucker's offer. It revealed so much about the man: his willingness to sacrifice his own comfort, his respect for her boundaries, his quiet acceptance of her as a permanent part of his life. In the 2 months she'd known him, he had never once made her feel unwelcome or unwanted. Yet he had also never indicated any desire for their marriage to be more than the arrangement of convenience it had begun as. Sometimes, catching him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, Nora wondered if he might want more. But he never acted on whatever thoughts prompted those looks, and she was too uncertain of her own feelings and too wary after her experiences in Philadelphia to invite a deeper connection. Still, as she pulled the quilt tighter around herself against the autumn chill, she couldn't help wondering what it would be like to share the warmth of the fireplace with Tucker Jones, and perhaps more than just the fireplace. Sunday arrived clear and crisp, with the first real bite of approaching winter in the air. Nora dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green wool that Harriet had altered to fit her perfectly, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style. Tucker, too, had made an effort, wearing a clean white shirt and string tie with his usual dark trousers, his unruly hair slicked back with water. "You look nice," he said when she emerged from her room, the words clearly costing him some effort. "Thank you," Nora replied, touched by the compliment. "So do you." The drive to town was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the day ahead. Nora was nervous about facing the townspeople en masse, especially knowing that her potential position as teacher hung in the balance. "It'll be fine," Tucker said as they approached the church, seemingly reading her thoughts. "Just be yourself." And if that's not enough, Tucker's jaw tightened, then they don't deserve you as their teacher. His unwavering support bolstered Nora's courage. She lifted her chin as he helped her down from the wagon, determined to face whatever reception awaited them with the same dignity she'd maintained on that auction block months ago. The church was nearly full when they entered, and a noticeable hush fell over the congregation as heads turned to observe the newcomers. Tucker guided Nora to a pew near the back, nodding greetings to several people along the way. Harriet Whitley bustled over immediately, resplendent in a purple dress and matching hat. "About time you two showed your faces in church," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Been telling everyone our new teacher needs to meet the community proper." She winked at Nora. "Already got 3 families eager to have their children benefit from a real Philadelphia education." Nora squeezed Harriet's hand gratefully, understanding the older woman was deliberately setting a positive tone for others to follow. The service itself was straightforward, with Reverend Miller delivering a sermon on charity and judgment that seemed pointedly relevant to Nora's situation, though he never looked directly at her. When the final hymn had been sung, the real test began as congregation members lingered to socialize. Harriet appointed herself Nora's unofficial sponsor, introducing her to the mothers of school-aged children and proudly recounting Nora's teaching credentials. Tucker remained close by, a silent but reassuring presence as Nora navigated the curious questions and occasional skeptical looks. Mrs. Jones, a woman with 3 young children in tow, approached. "I'm Sarah Connolly. My husband runs the livery. These are my children William, 8, James, 6, and little Mary, who will be starting school this winter." Nora smiled at the children, particularly the shy little girl who hid partially behind her mother's skirts. "It's lovely to meet you all. William has a real head for numbers," Mrs. Connolly continued, "but James struggles with his letters. The boys said Mr. Farnsworth would rap their knuckles when they made mistakes." She looked at Nora questioningly. "I find encouragement far more effective than punishment," Nora replied. "In my experience, children learn best when they feel safe and supported." Mrs. Connolly's expression softened. "That's a refreshing approach. The boys were dreading school this winter." More parents approached, each with questions about Nora's teaching methods or concerns about their children's specific needs. Nora answered honestly and patiently, drawing on her years of experience in Philadelphia. Gradually, she could feel a shift in the atmosphere from skepticism to cautious acceptance, and in some cases, genuine enthusiasm. Not everyone was won over. Victoria Blackwell and a small circle of well-dressed women observed from a distance, occasionally whispering behind gloved hands, and one gruff-looking man approached Tucker rather than Nora, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard. "Heard you bought her at auction, Jones. That true?" Tucker's face remained impassive. "I paid to free Mrs. Jones from an unjust situation. Then I married her properly before God and witnesses. That's all anyone needs to know." The man persisted. But you don't know nothing about her past, her people. I know everything I need to know, Tucker interrupted, his voice low but firm. She's my wife. That's the end of it. The exchange might have escalated, but Reverend Miller chose that moment to approach Nora. Mrs. Jones, I've heard nothing but positive comments about your qualifications. If you're still interested in the teaching position, I believe we can come to an arrangement. Relief washed over Nora. I'm very interested, Reverend. Excellent. School typically begins after harvest, around the 1st of November, and continues until planting season in April. The pay is modest, $20 a month plus supplies. That's more than fair, Nora said. $20 was indeed modest compared to her salary in Philadelphia, but money held different meaning here on the frontier. Then the position is yours, the preacher said, extending his hand. Welcome to Willow Creek, Mrs. Jones officially. As they drove home, Nora could hardly contain her excitement. Did you hear what Mrs. Peterson said about her son's interest in geography? And the Welland twins are apparently voracious readers. I'll need to compile a proper reading list, and perhaps we could organize a small library corner in the schoolhouse. Oh, and I should start planning lessons immediately, Tucker chuckled, a rare sound that stopped Nora mid-sentence. What's funny? You, he said, with a warmth in his voice she'd never heard before. Never seen you so animated. Teaching really matters to you, doesn't it? It does, Nora admitted. I've missed it more than I realized. Thank you for suggesting it. Tucker shrugged. Seemed a waste to have a trained teacher cooking and cleaning when the town needs someone to educate its children. Does that mean you're planning to cook and clean now? Nora teased. Tucker actually laughed this time. God help us if I did. We'd starve in a week, and the dust would bury us by month's end. Their shared laughter felt like a shifting of something between them, a new easiness, a deepening of their connection beyond the practical arrangement it had begun as. For the first time, Nora found herself thinking of Tucker not just as her rescuer or reluctant husband, but as a partner in the life they were building together. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Tucker brought up the subject of winter arrangements again. Been thinking about the bedroom situation, he said, staring into the flames. What if we build a wall, divide the main bedroom into 2 smaller rooms, both with access to the fireplace? Nora considered the idea. The main bedroom was spacious enough that it could feasibly be divided, though the resulting rooms would be quite small. That could work, I suppose, but wouldn't it be a lot of trouble? Not so much. I'm handy with tools. Could have it done before the first snow. If you're sure, Nora said, though something in her was disappointed by the solution. It felt like Tucker was literally building a wall between them, cementing the platonic nature of their relationship. Over the next week, Tucker worked on the bedroom project whenever he wasn't attending to ranch duties. He built a sturdy frame wall down the middle of the room, leaving a small hallway at one end so both rooms could access the fireplace. He moved his bed and bureau to one side, Nora's to the other, and hung a door for each room. The result was practical, if not particularly elegant. Nora's new room was smaller than her previous one but much warmer, with the fireplace providing steady heat. A small window looked out over the garden, and Tucker had even built her a small shelf for books and personal items. It's perfect, she told him when he showed her the completed project. Thank you for all your hard work. Tucker nodded, seeming pleased with her reaction. Should keep us both warm through winter now. And it did. As autumn gave way to winter, with snow piling high around the cabin and temperatures plummeting, Nora was grateful for the warmth of the fireplace. Each night, Tucker would bank the fire before they retired to their respective rooms, ensuring it would last until morning. Nora's days took on a new rhythm once school began. 3 mornings a week, Tucker would drive her to town in the sleigh, returning to collect her in the afternoon. The other days, she remained at the ranch, keeping up with household duties and preparing lessons for her 12 students, who ranged in age from 5 to 14. Teaching in Willow Creek was both more challenging and more rewarding than her position in Philadelphia had been. With limited resources and a wide range of ages and abilities, Nora had to be creative and flexible. But the children were eager to learn, and their parents, with a few exceptions, were supportive and appreciative of her efforts. Even Victoria Blackwell had grudgingly acknowledged Nora's success, remarking to Harriet, who promptly reported it to Nora, that the Jones woman seems to have a way with children, whatever her background might be. As winter deepened, the ranch became increasingly isolated. Heavy snows often made the road to town impassable, forcing Nora to cancel school days and leaving her and Tucker alone together for days at a stretch. These periods of isolation might have been uncomfortable earlier in their relationship, but by now, they had developed a comfortable rapport. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Tucker carving or mending tack, Nora reading or grading student work. Sometimes they talked, Tucker sharing stories of his years as a cattle driver or soldier, Nora recounting amusing incidents from her classroom. Other times, they simply enjoyed the companionable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. It was during one such evening, with a blizzard raging beyond the cabin walls, that their relationship took an unexpected turn. Nora was reading aloud from the Iliad, Tucker's copy, which she discovered was well worn from frequent reading, when he suddenly asked, "Do you miss it? Philadelphia, I mean, civilization?" She looked up, surprised by the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the libraries, the museums. Concert halls, hot baths that don't require hauling buckets of water." She smiled to soften the words. "But I don't miss the crowds, the noise, the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't quite comfortable being." Tucker nodded thoughtfully. "What about family, friends?" "I told you before my parents died 2 years ago. I have a cousin in Boston, but we were never close." Nora marked her place in the book. "As for friends, I had colleagues, certainly, but true friends, those were few." "Because of your position as a teacher." "Partly," Nora acknowledged. "There were certain expectations for a young, unmarried schoolteacher. I was supposed to be above reproach, almost none like in my dedication to my pupils. It made forming close friendships difficult." She hesitated, then added, "And then there was Richard Thompson." Tucker's expression sharpened. "The man who had you arrested," Nora nodded. "He was the son of the school's benefactor. He began courting me, or what passed for courtship in his mind. When I rejected his proposal, he became difficult. He spread rumors about my character, made my position at the school uncomfortable." She sighed. "When that didn't work, he resorted to the theft accusation." "Bastard," Tucker muttered. "Yes, he was," Nora agreed. "But in a strange way, I'm almost grateful to him now." She met Tucker's questioning gaze. "If not for his actions, I would never have come west, never have met you or Harriet. Never have found this life, which for all its hardships feels more genuine than what I had before." Tucker was silent for a long moment. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me that day?" The question caught Nora off guard. "No," she said softly. "I've never regretted it." Even though it's not a real marriage. There it was, the acknowledgement they'd both been dancing around for months. Nora felt her heart quicken. "Isn't it?" she asked. "We live together, work together, share our days and evenings. We support each other, respect each other." "What makes a marriage real beyond that?" Tucker's gaze held hers. "You know what?" Heat rose in Nora's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Yes, I know what, but that doesn't make what we have any less valuable or meaningful." "No," Tucker agreed quietly. It doesn't. Something in his tone made Nora's breath catch. Tucker, a sudden crash from outside interrupted whatever she might have said. Tucker was on his feet immediately, reaching for the rifle he kept near the door. "Stay here," he instructed, pulling on his coat. "What is it?" Nora asked, alarmed. "Probably just the wind brought down a branch on the barn roof. But I'd better check." He disappeared into the howling storm, leaving Nora alone with her racing thoughts. Had they been on the verge of something momentous? Had she imagined the shift in Tucker's expression, the new tension in the air between them? 10 minutes passed, then 15. Worry began to gnaw at Nora. The blizzard outside was fierce, with temperatures well below freezing. Even the short distance to the barn was treacherous in such conditions. Just as she was about to put on her coat and go looking for him, the door burst open, admitting a gust of snow-laden wind and a frost-covered Tucker. He was carrying something in his arms, a small, bedraggled bundle of fur. "Found this little one huddled against the barn door," he said, kicking the door closed behind him. "Nearly frozen solid." Nora hurried forward to see a half-grown puppy, its black and white fur matted with ice and snow. "Oh, the poor thing. Is it alive?" "Barely," Tucker said, bringing the puppy to the fire. "Get some blankets." Nora rushed to fetch blankets from her bed. Together they gently dried the trembling animal, wrapping it in the warm fabric and placing it near the hearth. "Where did it come from?" Nora wondered, stroking the puppy's head. Could it be one of the Petersons' farm dogs? They live closest. "Too far in this storm," Tucker said, shaking his head. "Must be a stray, or maybe someone dropped it thinking we could use a dog." The puppy's eyes fluttered open, one blue, one brown, and it gave a weak whimper. Nora's heart melted. "We need to get some warm milk into it," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. They spent the next hour nursing the puppy, coaxing it to drink warm milk mixed with a bit of broth, and keeping it wrapped in blankets by the fire. Gradually, the small creature began to show signs of recovery, its tail giving a tentative wag when Tucker scratched behind its ears. "It's a miracle it survived out there," Nora said, watching the puppy finally drift into what appeared to be normal sleep rather than near-death unconsciousness. "Tough little thing," Tucker agreed. He looked at Nora, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Reminds me of someone else I know." The comparison startled Nora into laughter. "Are you calling me a bedraggled stray, Tucker Jones?" His smile broadened. "A survivor, someone who doesn't give up, even when the odds are stacked against them." The compliment warmed Nora more than the fire. "Thank you for rescuing it." "Seems I have a habit of taking in strays," Tucker said, his tone light but his eyes serious as they met hers. The moment from earlier returned, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. But this time, it was Nora who broke the tension, suddenly uncertain of her own feelings and afraid of misreading his. "It's getting late," she said, rising to her feet. "We should both get some rest. I'll check on the puppy during the night." Tucker nodded, accepting her retreat without comment. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Tucker." In her bed that night, with the new wall between them seemingly thinner than ever, Nora found sleep elusive. The conversation by the fire played over and over in her mind. What had Tucker been about to say before the interruption? What might have happened if the puppy hadn't needed rescuing? And more importantly, what did she want to happen? The question haunted her as she drifted into fitful sleep. The blizzard lasted 3 days, keeping them snowbound at the ranch. The puppy, whom they named Scout for his apparent wandering tendencies, recovered quickly, proving to be a lively and affectionate addition to their household. Tucker built him a small bed that sat near the hearth, though more often than not, Scout could be found curled at Nora's feet as she worked or read. "He's clearly chosen his favorite," Tucker observed on the 3rd evening. watching as Scout followed Nora around the kitchen while she prepared dinner. "He's just grateful to whoever feeds him," Nora replied, though she was secretly pleased by the puppy's attachment. "Smart dog, then," Tucker said. "Knows who makes the best food in the territory." The compliment made Nora smile. Tucker had become more expressive in recent weeks, more likely to voice appreciation, or even offer the occasional jest. It was as if the harsh winter, far from creating distance between them, had somehow brought them closer. Yet neither of them had revisited the conversation from the night they found Scout. The unspoken question of what made a real marriage hung between them, acknowledged but unaddressed. When the storm finally broke, Tucker spent the day clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop, checking on the livestock, and assessing any damage to the outbuildings. Nora used the opportunity to give the cabin a thorough cleaning, airing out bedding and sweeping up the dust and tracked in snow that had accumulated during their confinement. By evening, they were both exhausted but satisfied with their accomplishments. After dinner, as they sat by the fire with Scout snoring softly between them, Tucker said, "Road should be passable by tomorrow. I can take you to town for school if you're ready." "The children must be climbing the walls after 3 days inside," Nora said with a smile. "Their parents will be grateful to send them to school," Tucker nodded. "Thought we might stay for dinner at the hotel afterward, sort of a celebration." "Celebration? 6 months," Tucker said. "Tomorrow marks 6 months since." He trailed off, apparently realizing that reminding her of the auction might not be the most romantic way to suggest an anniversary celebration, but Nora was touched that he'd remembered. "6 months since you saved me," she completed for him. "Since we were married." "Yes," Tucker said. "Thought it might be nice to mark the occasion. If you want to." "I'd like that very much," Nora said softly. The following day, school went better than Nora had expected after the long break. The children were indeed restless, but also eager to share stories of their snow-bound adventures and to return to the routine of lessons. By the end of the day, they had made good progress on their studies, and Nora had assigned reading to make up for the lost time. Tucker arrived to collect her just as she was dismissing the class. She watched through the schoolhouse window as he helped the younger children into their coats and hats, kneeling to ready a little girl's bootlaces when they came undone. The sight of his large, calloused hands working so gently with the child's small foot made something twist in Nora's chest. He would be a wonderful father, she thought, and the realization was both startling and somehow inevitable. Of course, Tucker would be good with children. He was patient, kind, and steady, all the qualities a child needed in a parent. But having children would require their marriage to become real in the way they discussed, or almost discussed that night by the fire. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through Nora's stomach, not entirely unpleasant. The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they arrived, most of the town's residents still catching up on chores delayed by the storm. Tucker had reserved a table near the fireplace and ordered their meal in advance: roast beef with all the trimmings, followed by apple pie, a luxury compared to their usual fare at the ranch. "This is lovely," Nora said, looking around at the neatly set table with its white cloth and actual napkins. "I didn't realize Willow Creek had such amenities." "Mrs. Henderson runs a good establishment," Tucker agreed. "Not exactly Philadelphia standards, but the best we have here." "It's perfect," Nora assured him. "Thank you for suggesting it." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the food indeed excellent by frontier standards. Nora found herself studying Tucker across the table, noting how the firelight cast warm highlights in his dark hair and softened the usually stern lines of his face. He had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a clean shirt and the string tie she'd helped him select during one of their trips to town. "What?" Tucker asked, catching her gaze. "Nothing," Nora said, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. "Just, thank you for everything. These past 6 months have been, not what I expected when I came west, certainly, but I'm grateful for how things turned out." Tucker nodded, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you said, during the storm, about what makes a marriage real." Nora's heart quickened. "Oh. You were right, it's not just physical matters, it's partnership, respect, building something together." He paused, seeming to search for words. "But I want you to know that if you ever wanted, that is, if you decided you wanted a complete marriage, I wouldn't be opposed." The formal, almost stilted way he phrased it might have been comical in other circumstances. But Nora understood the courage it had taken for Tucker to raise the subject, to make himself vulnerable to rejection. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us, about what might be possible between us." Tucker's eyes darkened. And Nora took a deep breath. I think I would like to try, for our marriage to be complete, if you want that too." The look that crossed Tucker's face, relief, joy, desire, took Nora's breath away. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I want that," he said simply. "Have for a while now." The admission made Nora's heart soar. "Why didn't you say anything?" Tucker's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. Wanted it to be your choice, freely made." Of course he had. It was so typically Tucker, putting her comfort and agency above his own desires. In that moment, Nora realized she had fallen in love with him, not suddenly but gradually, day by day over the past 6 months. "Tucker," she said softly, "I think we should go home now." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." The ride home seemed both interminable and too short. They sat close on the sleigh seat, Tucker's arm around Nora to steady her over the rutted, snow-covered road. The physical contact, innocent as it was, felt charged with new meaning. When they reached the ranch, Tucker took care of the horse with record speed while Nora went ahead to the cabin. Scout greeted her enthusiastically, but even the puppy seemed to sense something was different, settling quickly by the fire instead of demanding his usual playtime. Nora moved around the cabin, lighting lamps, adding wood to the fire, and after a moment's hesitation removing the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves down her back. She had just set the last pin on the mantel when the door opened and Tucker entered. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the room. Then Tucker closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I've never told you how beautiful you are," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought it many times but never said it." Nora's breath caught. "You think I'm beautiful?" "From the moment I lifted that sack from your head." Tucker reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and touched a strand of her hair. "You looked at me with those eyes, defiant, scared, but so strong, and I knew I'd have married you even if you'd been the plainest woman in Montana." The words, so unexpected from the usually reticent Tucker, brought tears to Nora's eyes. "I thought you married me out of pity, or duty." Tucker shook his head. "Started that way, maybe, but not for long." His hand moved from her hair to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Nora?" As a husband should kiss his wife. In answer, Nora rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss began gently, almost tentatively, but quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged longing surged between them. Tucker's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him, while Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Have for a while now. Joy bloomed in Nora's chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "My cowboy who bought me at auction and made me his wife." A slow smile spread across Tucker's face. "Best $100 I ever spent." Nora laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Take me to bed, Tucker Jones. I believe we have a marriage to make complete." In the days and weeks that followed, Nora and Tucker's relationship blossomed into the true partnership they had begun building months before, now enhanced by the physical and emotional intimacy they shared. The wall between their bedrooms came down literally, as Tucker dismantled it one weekend, returning the main bedroom to its original spacious state. Winter gave way to spring, bringing with it new life on the ranch. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and Scout grew from a scraggly puppy into a handsome young dog with boundless energy and unwavering loyalty. School continued, with Nora's students showing remarkable progress under her guidance. Even the most skeptical parents had been won over by her dedication and the clear results of her teaching methods. As April brought warmer weather and the end of the school term approached, Nora began to suspect a new development in their lives. Her monthly courses, regular as clockwork since girlhood, were late. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the change in diet since coming west. But as weeks passed and other symptoms appeared, tender breasts, unusual fatigue, a strange aversion to the coffee she usually enjoyed, she could no longer ignore the likely explanation. She confirmed her suspicions with Harriet, who examined her with the practiced eye of a woman who had birthed 5 children of her own and assisted with countless other births in the territory. "I'd say you're about 8 weeks along," Harriet declared, beaming. "Due sometime in November, I'd guess. Perfect timing after harvest, but before the worst of winter sets in." Nora placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "A baby," she whispered, awe and terror mingling in her voice. "We're having a baby." "And what a lucky child it will be," Harriet said firmly. "With you for its mother and Tucker Jones for its father, that man will move heaven and earth for those he loves." That evening, Nora prepared Tucker's favorite meal, venison stew with dumplings, and set the table with special care. She had considered various ways to share the news, but decided simple directness was best. Tucker had never been one for elaborate gestures or roundabout conversations. When he came in from the barn, he noticed the special preparations immediately. "What's the occasion?" he asked, washing up at the basin. "Can't a wife prepare a special meal for her husband without an occasion?" Nora teased, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. Tucker studied her face. "She can, but something tells me there is an occasion." They sat down to eat, and Nora tried to maintain normal conversation, asking about his day and telling him about the progress her students were making with their end-of-term projects. But halfway through the meal, Tucker set down his spoon and reached across the table to take her hand. "Nora," he said gently, "whatever it is, you can tell me." She met his eyes, seeing the love and concern there, and found her courage. "I'm with child," she said softly. "We're going to have a baby, Tucker, in November." For a moment, Tucker went perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, to Nora's surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Nora nodded, her own eyes welling up in response to his evident joy. "Are you happy?" Tucker stood, came around the table, and knelt beside her chair, placing a reverent hand on her stomach. "Happier than I've ever been," he said, looking up at her with such love that it took her breath away. "Thank you, Nora, for coming into my life, for being my wife, for giving me a family." Nora placed her hand over his. "I should be thanking you. You saved me that day in more ways than one." Tucker shook his head. "We saved each other." And as he drew her into his arms, Nora knew it was true. They had both been alone in their different ways until fate and a cruel auction had brought them together. Now they had built something neither could have imagined that day 6 months ago. A true marriage, a home, and soon, a child to share their love. November arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature herself was cooperating with Nora's approaching delivery. The harvest had been abundant, the ranch was prepared for winter, and Tucker had completed the nursery, a small room adjacent to their bedroom that had previously been used for storage. Nora's pregnancy had progressed smoothly, with Harriet checking on her regularly and Tucker hovering protectively whenever he wasn't tending to ranch duties. The school board had hired a temporary teacher for the winter term, with Nora planning to resume teaching in the spring if all went well with the baby. On a golden afternoon 2 weeks before her expected date, Nora was hanging laundry in the yard, enjoying what might be the last truly pleasant day before winter set in. Scout lay nearby, his attention divided between watching for rabbits and keeping a protective eye on his mistress. The first pain caught Nora by surprise, a sharp cramp that made her drop the sheet she was hanging. She dismissed it as the false pains Harriet had warned might come in the final weeks, but when a second, stronger contraction followed shortly after, she knew this was the real beginning. Tucker. She called, but he was too far away in the north pasture to hear. Scout, sensing her distress, rose and pressed against her legs, whining softly. "It's all right, boy," Nora assured him, stroking his head. "I just need to get back to the house." She made it inside just as another contraction gripped her. This one was strong enough to make her gasp and clutch the back of a chair for support. When it passed, she moved as quickly as she could to prepare, laying out clean linens, filling the kettle with water, and sending Scout to find Tucker with a note tied to his collar. By the time Tucker burst through the door, wild-eyed with worry, Nora was kneeling beside the bed, breathing through another contraction. "The baby's coming," she said, managing a smile despite the pain. "Scout found you." "Barely made it to the tree line before I heard him barking," Tucker said, kneeling beside her and taking her hand. "What do you need me to do?" "Send for Harriet," Nora said. "And then just stay with me." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination for Nora. Harriet arrived quickly, bringing her experienced calm to the birthing room. Tucker remained by Nora's side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement as she labored to bring their child into the world. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the bedroom, Harriet announced, "I can see the head." "One more big push, Nora." Gathering her remaining strength, Nora bore down with all her might. There was a moment of searing pain, then blessed relief as their child slipped into the world with a lusty cry. "A girl," Harriet exclaimed triumphantly. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Tucker's face, when Nora looked up at him, was transformed with wonder and joy. "A daughter," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. "We have a daughter." After Harriet had cleaned and swaddled the infant, she placed her in Nora's arms. Looking down at the tiny, perfect face already showing Tucker's strong chin, and what would likely be Nora's honey brown hair, Nora felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," she whispered, tracing a gentle finger along the baby's soft cheek. "What shall we call her?" Tucker asked, perched on the edge of the bed, his arm around Nora's shoulders as they gazed at their newborn. Nora had been considering names throughout her pregnancy, but hadn't settled on any. Now, looking at their daughter born of an unlikely union that had begun with an auction, and a sack over her head, she knew exactly what this child represented. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope, because that's what you gave me that day in town and what she represents for our future." Tucker nodded, blinking back tears. Hope Jones. It's perfect. As twilight deepened into night with Harriet discreetly busy in the kitchen preparing a celebratory meal, Tucker and Nora remained huddled together on their bed, marveling at the miracle they had created. "I never thought I'd have this," Tucker admitted, his voice low and reverent. "A wife, a child, a true family. After the war I was lost, angry, thought I'd live out my days alone on this ranch." Nora leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "And I never thought I'd find myself auctioned off in a frontier town with a sack over my head." She smiled up at him. "Life takes unexpected turns." "Thank God for that," Tucker said fervently, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Nora Jones. You and Hope are everything to me." "And we love you," Nora replied, her heart full to bursting. "My cowboy who lifted the sack and said he'd marry me that day." As Hope slept peacefully in her arms and Tucker's steady heartbeat sounded beneath her ear, Nora reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. From the auction block to this warm bed, from desperate stranger to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been unlikely but perfect in its way. The sack that had once hidden her face had actually revealed her future, a future brighter and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in her previous life. And it had all begun with a quiet cowboy's act of courage and compassion, lifting not just the burlap from her head but the uncertainty from her future. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing their homestead in pristine white. But inside, wrapped in love and new life, Nora had never felt warmer or more certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be.